Diderot, more open even in his ambush, reluctantly employed cunning. He does not hide how much he wished boldly to insert his principles, and those principles are explained when he writes, "The age of Louis XIV only produced two men worthy of cooperating to the encyclopedia, and these two men were Perrault and Boindin. The merits of the latter are more conspicuous than those of the former. Boindin, born in 1676, had lately died, a reputed atheist, and had been refused Christian burial. The notoriety of his principles had shut the French Academy against him, and with such titles he could not have failed being a worthy cooperator. Such then the object, such the intention of the conspiring authors. We see by their own confession that they did not wish to compile for science, but for infidelity. We see by their own confession that they did not wish to compile for science, but for infidelity, that it was not the advancement of arts they sought, but to seize the moment when the attention of the ruling authorities was drawn off to propagate their impious calumnies against religion. They hypocritically utter some few religious truths and print the contrary of what they believed on Christianity, but only the better to cover the sophisms which they printed against it. In spite of all their arts, however, men zealous for religion forcibly opposed the work. The Dauphin, in particular, obtained a temporary suspension of it, and various were the obstacles encountered by its authors. D'Alembert, wearied, had nearly forsaken it, when Voltaire, sensible of the importance of this first tool of the conspiracy, roused his drooping courage. He, far from abating, rather redoubled his efforts, asking for and incessantly sending fresh articles. He would extol perseverance. He would show D'Alembert and Diderot the ignominy and shame redounding to their opponents. He would urge them, conjure them, by their friendship, or in the name of philosophy, to overcome their disgust, and not to be foiled in so glorious an undertaking. At length, the encyclopedia was brought to a conclusion, and it made its appearance under the sanction of a public privilege. Triumphant in their first step, the conspirators saw in it but the forerunner of their future successes against religion. That no doubt may exist as to the particular drift of this compilation, the reader must be made acquainted with the cooperators chosen by D'Alembert and Diderot, especially for the religious part. Their first divine was Raynal, a man just expelled from the order of the Jesuits on account of his impiety, that very thing which constituted his chief and strongest recommendation to D'Alembert. Every one, unfortunately, knows how well he verified the judgment of his former brethren by his atrocious declamations against Christianity, but few are acquainted with the anecdote of his expulsion from among the cooperators, and that connects his story with that of another divine, who, without being impious himself, had been unfortunately drawn into the company of the sophisters. This was the Abbé Yvon, an odd metaphysician, but an inoffensive and upright man, often in extreme indigence, and living by his pen when he thought he could do it with decency. In the simplicity of his heart, he had written the defense of the Abbé Depravity. I have heard him assert that not a single error could be found in that work, and on the first argument give up the point. With the same simplicity, I have heard him relate by what means he had cooperated in the encyclopedia. I was in want of money, said he. Raynal met me and persuaded me to write a few articles, promising me a good reward. I acceded, and when my work was delivered at Raynal's study, I received 25 louis d'or, Thinking myself very well paid, I imparted my good fortune to one of the booksellers employed for the encyclopedia, who seemed much surprised that the articles furnished by Renal should not be his own. He was furious at the trick he suspected. A few days after this I was sent for to the office, and Renal, who had received 1,000 crowns for his pretended work, was obliged to refund me the 100 louis d'or he had kept for himself. This anecdote will not surprise those who are acquainted with Renal's plagiary talents. His impiety was not indeed sufficient to prevent his dismission, but it preserved him within the pale of the fraternal embrace. I must add that the articles on God and on the soul, furnished by the Abbé Yvonne, are exactly those which grieved Voltaire to the heart, and for which D'Alembert and Diderot were obliged to have recourse to their art of references. The third divine, or as D'Alembert styles him the second, for he never dared mention Yvonne to Voltaire, was the Abbé Depravity, obliged to fly to Prussia for an attempt to impose on the Sorbonne by advancing his own impious propositions as those of religion. It was the cunning of this thesis which had missed the Abbé Yvonne, which had misled the Abbé Yvonne. But being soon discovered, the Parliament took it up. The author, nevertheless, was put under the protection of the King of Prussia by Voltaire and D'Alembert. We also owe it to the memory of the Abbé Depravity to relate what his protectors would willingly conceal, that 3 years afterward he publicly retracted all his errors in a declaration signed the 6th of April, 1754, bewailing his intimacy with the sophisters, adding that one life could not suffice to bewail his past conduct. He died in 1782. Another of their divines was the Abbé Morellet, a man dear to Voltaire and to D'Alembert, who, playing on his name, called him the Abbé Mord le Bitem, because under pretense of attacking the Inquisition he had fallen on Bitten, the church with all his might. Because under pretense of attacking the Inquisition he had fallen on Bitten, the church with all his might. Were we to enumerate the lay writers who cooperated in this work, we should find far worse than these divines. But we will only mention the celebrated Dumarsais, a man so infamous that the public authorities were obliged to interfere and destroy a school he had formed solely to imbue his pupils with the venom of his impiety. This unfortunate man also retracted his errors, but not till he lay on his deathbed. The choice of this man's pen shows the kind of cooperators which D'Alembert sought. Far be it from me to confound in this class such men as M.M., the foreman, or Jacquard, particularly the latter, to whom, as we have already said, they were indebted for many articles. The only reproach that can attach to him is that he should have continued his labors after he either saw or should have seen the drift of that vast compilation, wherein, intermixed with his toils, lay all the sophisms and calumnies impiety could invent. Excepting these two men, we may comprehend nearly all the rest of the encyclopedian writers in the following picture drawn by Diderot himself. All that detestable crew, who, though perfectly ignorant, valued themselves on knowing everything, who, seeking to distinguish themselves by that vexatious universality to which they pretended, fell upon everything, jumbled and spoiled all, and converted this pretended digest of science into a gulf, or rather a sort of rag-basket, where they promiscuously through everything have examined, ill-digested, good, bad, and indifferent, but always incoherent. What a precious avowal as to the intrinsic merit of their work, especially after what he says as to their views, in describing the pains they had taken, the the vexations it had caused them, and the art it had required to insinuate that they dared not openly write against prejudices, religion, in order to overthrow them without being perceived. But all these follies of the rag dealers contributed to the bulk and accelerated the appearance of the volumes, the chiefs carefully inserting in each volume what could promote the grand object. Being at length terminated, all the trumpets sounded, and the journals of the party teemed with the praises of this literary achievement. The learned themselves were duped. Every one would have an encyclopedia. Numerous were the editions of all sizes and prices, but in every successive one, under the pretense of correction, greater boldness was assumed. About the time when the anti-Christian revolution was nearly accomplished, appeared l'encyclopédie par ordre de matière. When it was first undertaken, some deference was still paid to religion. A man of eminent merit, Mr. Bergier, a canon of Paris, thought it incumbent on him to yield to the pressing solicitations of his friends, lest the part treating of religion should fall into the hands of its greatest enemies. What was easy to foresee came to pass. The name of a man who had combated the impious work of a Voltaire or a Rousseau naturally served as a cloak to this new digest, styled the Encyclopedia Methodized. This was on the eve of the French Revolution, so that the petty infidels charged with the work observed no farther bounds with regard to religion. This new work is more completely impious than the former, notwithstanding some excellent tracts of Mr. Bergier and of some others. And thus the sophisters of the day perfected the first tool of the anti-Christian conspirators. Note to Chapter 4, vide page 34, of the devices of the Encyclopedia. Look for the article God, Geneva edition, and you will find very sound notions, together with a direct physical and metaphysical demonstration of his existence. And indeed, under such an article, it would have been too bold to have broached anything even bordering on atheism, Spinozism, or Epicureanism, but the reader is referred to the article Demonstration, and there all the physical and metaphysical cogent arguments for the existence of a God disappear. We are there taught that all direct demonstrations suppose the idea of infinitude, and that such an idea cannot be very clear either to the naturalist or the metaphysician. This, in a word, destroys all confidence the reader has placed in the proofs adduced of the existence of God. There again they are pleased to tell you that a single insect, in the eyes of the philosopher, more forcibly proves the existence of a God than all the metaphysical arguments whatever. Ibid. But you are then referred to corruption, where you learn how cautious you must be of asserting in a positive manner that corruption can never beget animated bodies, that such a production of animated bodies by corruption seems to be countenanced by daily experiments, and that it is precisely from these experiments that the atheists conclude the existence of God to be unnecessary, either for the creation of man or animals. Prepossessed by these references against the existence of God, let the reader turn to the articles of Encyclopedia and Epicureanism. In the former, he will be told that there is no being in nature that can be called the first or last, and that a machine infinite in every way must be necessarily the deity. In the latter, the atom is to be the deity. It will be the primary cause of all things, by whom and of whom everything is active, essentially of itself, alone unalterable, alone eternal, alone immutable. And thus the reader will be insensibly led from the God of the Gospel to the heathenish fictions of an Epicurus or a Spinoza. The same cunning is to be found in the article of the soul. When the sophisters treat directly of its essence, they give the ordinary proofs of its spirituality and of its immortality. They will even add in the article, brute, that the soul cannot be supposed material, nor can the brute be reduced to the quality of a mere machine without running the hazard of making man an automaton. And under natural law, we read that if the determinations of man or even his oscillations arise from anything material and extraneous to his soul, there will be neither good nor evil, neither just nor unjust, neither obligation nor right. Then refer to the article Locke. In order to do away all this consequence, we are told that it is of no importance whether matter thinks or not, for what is that to justice or injustice, to the immortality of the soul, and to all the truths of the system, whether political or religious? The reader, enjoying the equality and liberty of his reason, is left in doubt with regard to the spirituality, and no longer knows whether he should not think himself all matter. But he will decide when, under the article animal, he finds that life and animation are only physical properties of matter, unless he should think himself debased by his resembling a plant or an animal. To console him in his fall, they will tell him, article, encyclopedia, and animal, that the only difference between certain vegetables and animals such as us is that they sleep and that we wake, that we are animals that feel, and that they are animals that feel not. And still further in the article animal, that the sole difference between a stock and a man is that the one ever falls, while the latter never falls, after the same manner. After perusing these articles bona fide, the reader must be insensibly drawn into the vortex of materialism. In treating of liberty or free agency, we find the same artifice. When they treat of it directly, they will say, take away liberty, all human nature is overthrown, and there will be no trace of order in society. Recompense will be ridiculous and chastisement unjust. The ruin of liberty carries with it that of all order and of police and legitimates. The most monstrous crime, so monstrous a doctrine, is not to be debated in the schools, but punished by the magistrates, and etc. O liberty, they exclaim, O liberty, gift of heaven, O liberty of action, O liberty of thought, thou alone art capable of great things. See articles, authority, and preliminary discourse. But at the article chance, fortuit, all this liberty of action and of thought is only a power that cannot be exercised, that cannot be known by actual exercise. And Diderot, in the article evidence, pretending to support liberty, will very properly say, this concatenation of causes and effects supposed by the philosophers in order to form ideas representing the mechanism of the universe is as fabulous as the Tritons and the Naiads. But both he and D'Alembert will descant again on the concatenation, and, returning to chance, fortuit, will tell you that though it is imperceptible, it is not the less real, that it connects all things in nature, and that all events depend on it, just as the wheels of the watch, and as to their motion, depend on each other, that from the first moment of our existence, we are by no means master of our motions, that were there a thousand worlds similar to this, simultaneously existing and governed by the same laws, everything in the world would be done in the same way. And that man, in virtue of these same laws, would perform at the same instance of time the same actions in each of these worlds. This will naturally convince the uninformed reader of the chimera of such a liberty or free agency which cannot be exercised. Not content with this, Diderot, in the article Fatality, after a long dissertation on this concatenation of causes, ends by saying that it cannot be contested either in the physical world or in the moral and intellectual world. Then what becomes of that liberty without which there no longer exists just or unjust, obligation or right? These examples will suffice to convince the reader of the truth of what we have asserted as to the artful policy with which the encyclopedia had been digested. They will show with what cunning its authors sought to spread the principles of atheism, materialism, and fatalism, in short, to plant every error incompatible with that religion for which at their outset they professed so great a reverence.